In Florida, NBC News projects Ronald Reagan the winner of Florida's 17 electoral votes. And so we will put on our map in blue, for those of you who are watching in color, dark gray and black and white, we'll make Florida our projected winner for Reagan. We have the electoral vote, therefore, given the fact that we had projected Indiana for Reagan earlier, is now 30 for Reagan, 2 states projected so far. We have another southern state to project. Florida was carried by Carter 4 years ago. Mississippi was carried by Carter 4 years ago. But tonight, our projected winner in Mississippi is the Republican candidate, Ronald Reagan. And so, again, in blue, or dark gray and black and white sets, light gray, I'll get that straight this evening, light gray and blue, we move another 7 electoral votes into our projected column of electoral votes for Reagan, 37. 3 states projected for Ronald Reagan now.
We are projecting the state of Alabama for Ronald Reagan. Reagan wins in Alabama, 9 electoral votes, right next door to Jimmy Carter's home state of Georgia. And the state of Virginia, a state that Ronald Reagan, well, actually the Republicans won 4 years ago. We are projecting once again that Ronald Reagan will win Virginia. So we color those blue, as you can see in our map there. Blue if you have a color television set. I am told that it will be dark gray if you're watching in black and white. Reagan with 2 more important southern states to add to his electoral total. And there it is on our NBC map, as you can see it.
And we have one other projection to make. The votes are coming in from down there now. The polls are closed in several of those states. And NBC News has a projection that will not come as a surprise. We project in the state of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, the winner of its 12 electoral votes. Jimmy Carter carried Georgia the last time by 66% of the vote. It's not surprising that he would carry his home state again. And that gives him 12 electoral votes on our electoral vote projection board. Reagan 58 to Carter's 12 electoral votes. Reagan in several states, Carter so far only in his home state of Georgia.
Ronald Reagan will win the state of Ohio and its 25 electoral votes. Reagan wins Ohio, a big key industrial state in the Midwest. Its 25 electoral votes go into his column. He'll add those to Indiana, Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, all colored blue on the NBC News election map. That means they go into Ronald Reagan's column, and that's a very impressive beginning for him on this evening. And no Republican has ever been elected president of the United States, by the way, without winning Ohio. Here's the electoral vote as it now stands. Ronald Reagan, 83, Jimmy Carter, 12. Carter's all come from his home state of Georgia, needed to win 270 altogether. So it looks like a very substantial victory for Ronald Reagan, as we have been saying all evening here, before this evening is out, and it may be an early evening indeed for Ronald Reagan.
Now, with the polls having closed in a number of states and other key indicators have coming to us, we are going to project a number of states for Ronald Reagan, beginning with the state of Connecticut. Connecticut, with its 8 electoral votes, goes to Ronald Reagan. Our next projected victory for Ronald Reagan is New Jersey, with 17 electoral votes. New Jersey for Reagan. Going westward, we project Pennsylvania for Ronald Reagan. Pennsylvania, in his column, we project 27 electoral votes there. Further, Michigan, the state of Michigan, we project for Ronald Reagan 21 more electoral votes for his total. We go on. NBC News projects Illinois for Ronald Reagan. Illinois with its 26 electoral votes. Going further west, we project the state of North Dakota. No surprise there. He had been expected to take North Dakota's 3 electoral votes, and South Dakota, 4 electoral votes, which we project in the column for Ronald Reagan. Moving southward to Kansas. In the state of Kansas, we say Ronald Reagan is our projected winner. We also project Reagan the winner in the state of Missouri with 12 important electoral votes. Further into the border states, it is our projection that the state of Tennessee will be taken by Ronald Reagan, 10 electoral votes there. Going further south, the state of Oklahoma with 8 electoral votes. We project for Reagan. And finally, the big one, Texas, 26 electoral votes. We color blue or light gray, if you're watching in black and white, for Ronald Reagan. The map is turning blue for Reagan. We have another projection, and this time for President Carter. NBC News projects President Carter the winner in the District of Columbia. 3 electoral votes. The district has been voting since 1964, has never voted for a Republican presidential candidate. The president carried it last time with about 80% of the vote. A very high tally, but not unexpected. That brings the electoral standings to Carter 15, 12 from Georgia and 3 from the District of Columbia. Reagan all over, as Tom Brokaw said, the industrial East, the South, parts of the Middle West, the Dakotas, 252 electoral votes in the states marked in blue on your map, or light gray and black and white, and that's how it looks. Very early on this evening, it has been possible for NBC News to project all of that. Time has come. You've seen the map. We've looked at the figures, and NBC News now makes its projection for the presidency. Reagan is our projected winner. Ronald Wilson Reagan of California, a sports announcer, a film actor, a governor of California, is our projected winner at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time. On this election night, we have projected Ronald Reagan the winner. And to add evidence to that projection, we are projecting him as the winner in more states. By our calculations, Ronald Reagan is the winner in the state of New Hampshire, in the state of Vermont, Delaware, and South Carolina. We will be coloring in those on the map now in blue for Reagan, or light gray, black and white. New Hampshire is the first state that we are calling for him in this list of states. Vermont, we are coloring blue in a projection for Reagan. The state of Delaware, we are projecting for Reagan. And in the South, the state of South Carolina, we are projecting for Ronald Reagan. And that brings his electoral vote tally to the number required for victory. According to our projections, Ronald Reagan now has the required 270 electoral votes. Carter with 15 at this stage of the evening, 12 from Georgia, 3 from the District of Columbia. And Tom, that's our projection. We have another projection, this time for President Carter. NBC News projects President Carter the winner in the state of West Virginia. 6 electoral votes there, and no great surprise. And we will now fill in red or dark gray and black and white the state of West Virginia for the president. That means so far this evening we have projected him with 21 electoral votes. That's Georgia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. And Reagan, while the polls are still closed in most of the states in the West, is holding at the 270 electoral votes we project him to have. That's enough to win. David? We are projecting now for Ronald Reagan, and we'll fill them in on our map in blue. The state of Wisconsin, which went to Carter in 1976. Wisconsin, we now show as going to Reagan in a projection. We also show Nebraska, which was Republican 4 years ago. 5 electoral votes. That's in the Reagan column. We project Reagan the winner in Wyoming. Republican 4 years ago. It's for Reagan tonight. And finally, Arizona. Arizona, which went for Jerry Ford in 1976, we project going for Reagan. That's a total in those 4 states of 22 electoral votes. And let's look at the electoral vote count now to see Carter with West Virginia, Georgia, and the District of Columbia, and Reagan with a number of states, well over the 270 needed to win. Tom?
John, it occurs to me that we have talked about landslides before in presidential politics. 1964 comes to mind, 1972,
yeah.
Richard Nixon over George McGovern. But 64 was a kind of high water mark in terms of a landslide when LBJ blew away Barry Goldwater. This is going to be bigger than that. NBC News now projecting that Jimmy Carter will win the state of Rhode Island and its 4 electoral votes. Jimmy Carter winning Rhode Island and the 4 electoral votes. So on our map, we will add now in the upper right-hand corner the tiny state of Rhode Island. That will be colored red for Jimmy Carter. Not much red up there, as you can see. An overwhelming Ronald Reagan victory that we are projecting tonight. Rhode Island had been expected to go to the Democrats, and indeed we are projecting that it will. So let's take a look now at the electoral vote as it now stands. Ronald Reagan, 295 electoral votes. Jimmy Carter, just 25. His home state of Georgia, the Democratic state of West Virginia, Rhode Island, and the District of Columbia. And that's all he has at this point.
Going to project some more states for Ronald Reagan now. NBC News projects Ronald Reagan the winner in the border state of Kentucky with its 9 electoral votes. And that's a solid block ranging all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Lake Michigan. We are also in the West projecting Reagan the winner in the state of New Mexico with 4 electoral votes. New Mexico, Reagan our projected winner. You can see him filling in the West with the states in blue, which we have marked on our map for Ronald Reagan. A lot of blue on the map. The electoral tally for Reagan by our projections is now over 308. Carter still at 25. That is one of the largest imbalances we have seen here in this studio, and maybe one of the largest since we've been using this particular computer setup. We are projecting now 5 more states for Ronald Reagan, and let's look at the map and we'll show you what they are. 7 electoral votes we project for Reagan in the state of Colorado. 3 electoral votes we project for Reagan in the state of Nevada. No surprise there. In Idaho, again, a state that had been expected to go for Reagan, 4 electoral votes, our projected winner there. We make him our projected winner in Utah and our projected winner in Montana. And that leaves only the Pacific Coast states there. It leaves Minnesota undecided and Iowa undecided, as you see, Arkansas and Louisiana, North Carolina, New York, and Maine. We're getting down, I believe, Maryland is still undecided, and that brings our projected electoral vote total to Reagan 330, Carter 25. Excuse me, that's one of the biggest differences we have ever seen. David, I guess we'd have to look in the record books for that.
I think you would have to go back to the Nixon-McGovern, when McGovern carried Massachusetts, period. That was all.
And the District of Columbia.
And the D.C.
Yep.
But of the states, he carried 1. So I thought it was a fitting farewell, well-spoken, very gracious. Didn't you?
I have one little, I made the clangor tonight.
What was it?
Well, the clangor was when I said that no sitting president had been defeated since Herbert Hoover, and Garrick immediately jumped in and said, what about Gerald R. Ford?
You left out the word elected.
I know, but I'm not going to take refuge in that. Ford was the last president who was defeated while in office. But I agree with you, David. I thought that was a graceful concession speech, and I think that Mr. Carter will bring to the transition many of the same energies he brought to the campaign and to the administration.
All of those names we saw, heard in the ballroom, Brzezinski, Jody Powell, Ham, Jordan, a whole bunch, they'll all be gone. Mm-hmm. They'll all be gone in what? 6 weeks.
It happens in a hurry when it happens. And speaking of things happening in a hurry, we're about to project another state. Jimmy Carter will take some comfort, as will Vice President Walter Mondale, and knowing that his home state, the state of Minnesota, is, we are projecting, if you look at our map right now, we will color that red, one of the few states colored red. That was thought to be safe for Jimmy Carter, but almost all pre-election polls have gone by the boards here tonight, and it remains safe for Jimmy Carter, projecting the state of Minnesota. So the electoral vote goes up for Jimmy Carter, 10 electoral votes. He's not even within reach, as you can see, of Ronald Reagan, nor will he be before this evening is over. He has 35 electoral votes. Certainly no one expected it to be quite this awesome this early in the evening. It broke pretty fast.
But but NBC News projects the state of Louisiana, and that Ronald Reagan is the winner in the state of Louisiana with its 10 electoral votes, which will be added to his total. And on our map, you'll be able to see Arkansas, the only holdout in there. Louisiana, our projected state for Reagan. And that will bring Reagan's number to 348 projected electoral votes. That's really quite a lot compared to, Carter has 10% of the projected electoral votes that we have awarded to Reagan tonight.
Yes.
So it's going to be a conservative Senate, which means it's going, with a Reagan in the White House, it's going to be a conservative U.S. government.
All right, we're going to call another state for Ronald Reagan.
Okay,
not surprisingly, it's a big one. It's his home state, California, 45 electoral votes. Ronald Reagan picks up his home state of California. He has never lost a race there. And we fill in that big chunk of the map, once again with blue, now solid blue practically, all the way from the Mississippi River westward, leaving only Oregon, Washington, and Arkansas, as you can see.
Beginning to look like a suburban swimming pool over there.
Well, and even in the east,
Sherman Oaks, I'd say, probably.
even in the east, Reagan is ahead of Well, go ahead and have a look at this.
We just want to show you the electoral vote. Ronald Reagan pushing hard at 400 electoral votes. No one was saying that just a couple of days ago. Jimmy Carter stuck on 35. There are fewer and fewer states to come in. Ronald Reagan, as we said early in the evening, locking up a big chunk of Jimmy Carter territory, or what was thought to be Jimmy Carter territory.
We were 10 undecided states. We'll bring that down to 8 states. First, NBC News projects in the state of Maryland that Jimmy Carter will be the winner of Maryland's electoral votes. And so we will move that into the red or dark gray in Maryland on our map. And then all the way on the other side of the country, in the state of Washington, which Gerald Ford won in a squeaker in 1976, we will project that for Ronald Reagan. And there's Washington, leaving us with 8 undecided states, including, as you see on your map, Hawaii and Alaska. So the electoral vote total now brings Reagan over the 400 mark and brings Carter to 45 electoral votes. Garrick, a couple of big projections coming up now. NBC News is going to project the state of New York. We say that our projected winner is Ronald Reagan in the 41 electoral votes of New York State. And there it is, going in the blue on your map. Carter has 4 states now in the District of Columbia. The electoral vote tally, Tom, Reagan is getting up to those very big tallies that we were talking about a few minutes ago, almost 450, 10 times the electoral margin of President Carter.
Well, let me add some more to Ronald Reagan's total if I can. We are now projecting that Ronald Reagan will win the state of Oregon. So on our map now, we will color in the state of Oregon blue, 6 electoral votes to the summary for Ronald Reagan. And as you look at the map, it is more than a swimming pool, David. It is now a full-size blue lake for Ronald Reagan all the way across the country, with just 1 or 2 red exceptions as we show it on the NBC map. Red for Jimmy Carter, of course. There's the electoral vote. Have we added the 6 from Oregon? 449 is the total?
Yeah, right.
Okay, 449 is the total for Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter, 45.
Good evening. The polls are still open in many parts of the country. Votes are already being counted in some others. And in 3 states where the polls now have closed, ABC News has the following projections. We project that Mr. Reagan has won in the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire has 4 electoral votes. ABC News also projects that Mr. Reagan is the winner in Kentucky. Kentucky has 9 electoral votes. And in Indiana, where the polls have also closed, ABC News projects Mr. Reagan the winner. That is 12 more electoral votes in Mr. Reagan's column. At this early stage of the game, then, President Reagan already has 25 electoral votes. 270 are needed to win. Good evening. It is now 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and the polls have just closed in 7 more states. ABC News projects that Ronald Reagan is the winner in the state of Florida with 21 electoral votes. ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan is the winner in the state of Georgia with 12 electoral votes. And we also project that Mr. Reagan is the winner in the state of Virginia with 12 electoral votes.
And we also project at this time that Reagan has won Alabama with its 9 electoral votes. Mississippi for Reagan with 7 electoral votes. Vermont, Reagan, 3 electoral votes. South Carolina, Reagan, 8 electoral votes.
Let us do now our, thank you, David. Let us do our first recap of the evening. Those states and 3 states that we projected during World News tonight, Indiana, Kentucky, and New Hampshire, make the present electoral vote total look like this: 97 for Mr. Reagan, none for Mr. Wandale. 270 needed to win.
4 states, and we have a little news on what they've been doing in those voting booths all day. In Ohio, we project the winner to be Ronald Reagan. 23 electoral votes, the biggest state we have been able to call so far tonight, one Mondale desperately wanted. In North Carolina, for Reagan, we project Reagan and 13 electoral votes in North Carolina.
David, it is early in the evening, but Mr. Reagan is piling on the electoral votes with 270 needed to win. Mr. Reagan has 133 and Mr. Mondale has none. Good evening. It is 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and the polls are closed in 16 more states. ABC News wishes to project that Ronald Reagan has won in the state of Texas with its 29 electoral votes. The polls are still open in some parts of the states, namely in El Paso, and there is an important House race there where your vote will still count. No Democrat has won the presidency without carrying Texas. ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan has won in the state of New Jersey. The Republicans have won it in the last 4 presidential elections. ABC News projects Mr. Reagan is the winner in the state of Missouri with its 11 electoral votes. ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan has won in Tennessee. He won it only by half a point in 1980. He wins it again tonight. And ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan is the winner of the 8 electoral votes in Oklahoma, part of his western base.
Peter, with the additional states closed, there are now enough electoral votes voted on and floating around to choose a president. We now project Connecticut to have gone to Mr. Reagan with its 8 electoral votes. Kansas for Mr. Reagan, 7 electoral votes by our projection. Maine, our projection is that Ronald Reagan has carried it, and it's 4 electoral votes. Delaware, our projection is that Reagan has carried Delaware with 3 electoral votes. And here's a big one. Illinois, Ronald Reagan, 24 electoral votes. Now the first victory tonight for Walter Mondale in the District of Columbia.
Adding up 254 for Mr. Reagan, 270 needed to win. Mr. Reagan is 16 short. Mr. Mondale has 3.
We now project the winner in Michigan to be Mr. Reagan, which gives him the electoral votes to make him president for a second term. It gives him a total of 274.
Ronald Reagan still has a chance for an historic 50-state sweep.
One more state has closed its polls, Arkansas. Our projection is that Arkansas has gone to Ronald Reagan with its 6 electoral votes. Now, 280 for Mr. Reagan, 3 for Mondale. The 3 being from the District of Columbia.
And I have a projection. ABC News now projects that Mr. Reagan has won, or is the winner, in the state of Pennsylvania with its 25 electoral votes. That was one the Democrats really wanted very, very badly, a large Italian vote among other things. You can see now what that means in terms of electoral votes: 305 for Mr. Reagan, 3 for Walter Mondale, and we remind you that those 3 for Mr. Mondale have come in the District of Columbia. ABC News now wishes to project the state of Maryland. At the presidential level, the state of Maryland for President Reagan. Now, that is normally a very strong Democratic state, Mr. Reagan getting 58% of the vote. That's one of only 6 states that went for Mr. Carter in 1980. Mr. Reagan did run ahead in the polls earlier this evening, or earlier in the campaign, I should say, but Mr. Mondale had hoped very much, as had the Democrats, that they would be able to hold the state of Maryland. ABC News projects it has gone to Mr. Reagan with 10 electoral votes. It is 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. It is 8 o'clock in the Midwest. ABC wishes to make the following projections. For president in the state of Louisiana, The 10 electoral votes ABC News projects will go for Mr. Reagan. He won it in 1980. He gets it this time. In Colorado, where the Midwest ends and the mountains begin, ABC projects Mr. Reagan will win Colorado, Gary Hart's home state, the Republican in every one of the last 4 elections. In Arizona, where the population shift has given Arizona an extra 1 electoral votes this year, ABC News projects Mr. Reagan. And in the state of Nebraska, typical of Mr. Reagan's strength in the Plains state, ABC News projects the 5 electoral votes will go to Mr. Reagan.
And we have more projections. New Mexico, also for Mr. Reagan. 5 electoral votes in New Mexico. In North Dakota, Ronald Reagan, 3 electoral votes. South Dakota, Ronald Reagan, 3 electoral votes by our projections. And in Wyoming, Ronald Reagan, 3 electoral votes. So up to this hour, it is a clean sweep of every state so far for President Reagan, with 3 electoral votes for Walter Mondale in the District of Columbia.
Exactly. To make another presidential projection, in the state of West Virginia, ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan will pick up the 6 electoral votes there.
The state of Rhode Island, which is one of the states the Democrats thought that they had a shot at. Rhode Island tonight we project for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, the tiny state by the sea, Rhode Island for Ronald Reagan. It is a little corner of blue up there. Massachusetts still could go for Walter Mondale, of course.
Here is a projection that will be particularly distressing to the Mondale campaign. We project that the state of Massachusetts has gone for Ronald Reagan. Massachusetts, President Reagan, 13 electoral votes.
We want to make an important projection. ABC News now projects that Mr. Reagan has won in the state of New York, which among other things is the home state of Geraldine Ferraro. The Democrats had hoped very much that Ms. Ferraro would help in the state of New York. ABC News projects that Mr. Reagan will win in the state of New York with its 36 electoral votes. That is the 2nd largest number of electoral votes in the country, second only to California.
In the presidential race, we project, ABC News projects, that Wisconsin has gone to Mr. Reagan. Wisconsin is a neighboring state of Minnesota, Mr. Mondale's home state. Seems not to have helped him much.
It is 10 o'clock in the east, 8 o'clock Mountain Time, 7 o'clock on the Pacific. ABC News now projects that Ronald Reagan has won the 5 electoral votes in the state of Utah, the state that has given the Republicans their largest margins in 1976 and 80. ABC News projects Mr. Reagan in the state of Nevada with its 4 electoral votes. And we also project that Mr. Reagan has won, no surprise, the state of Montana, part of Mr. Reagan's western political fortress.
And we have still more projections. In Iowa, we project that Ronald Reagan has won the state and its 8 electoral votes. In Idaho, which he carried with 66% of the vote in 1980, in Idaho, we project that Mr. Reagan has again won the state and its 4 electoral votes. Here's the electoral total as it stands now. It is an all so far. Many states are still open, still voting. So far, it is almost a totally clean sweep for Reagan. The 3 for Mondale from the District of Columbia.
Big one, the biggest one of all on this election map, the home state of the President of the United States, California, 47 electoral votes. President Reagan, the winner in California. Mondale and Ferraro spent a lot of time and a lot of money in that state, had hopes that they could knock the president off in his own state, but tonight proves that they could not. We're going to project another state for guess who?
We have very few left.
Guess who? Ronald Reagan wins the state of Hawaii.
I have a projection, one we have all been waiting for with some interest and curiosity. It is from Minnesota. We project that in Minnesota, Walter Mondale has won his home state, and the first state he has won this evening. It's fairly close. It should be remembered, by the way, that Mondale has not actually lived in Minnesota for about 20 years. He's lived in Washington. But nevertheless, it's his home state. He grew up there. And there you see the first blue state on the ABC News map. Minnesota for Mondale.
The day after one of the most impressive presidential victories in American history. President Reagan and George Bush won 59% of the vote, beating the Mondale-Ferraro ticket by 18 points.